Senator Thomas Grant insulted Leona Daniels in front of a crowd, mocking her community for its lack of responsibility. Little did he know that in just a few months, her calm gaze would hold his political future in its hands. Leona, whose life was dedicated to fighting systemic injustice and brutal racism, found herself at the pinnacle of power, where her strength and commitment to justice challenged those used to ruling through humiliation. Now, Grant's fate rested in her hands, and every move she made could change the lives of thousands. What she did next would shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the beginning. The City Hall meeting was in full swing, with hundreds gathered to hear Senator Thomas Grant's speech. Known for his controversial views on social policy, Grant spoke with confidence built over many years in politics, expecting respect from his audience. This time he argued for cutting government aid to the poor, claiming it only encouraged dependency. He suggested that individuals were responsible for their own struggles. As he finished urging people to stand on their own 2 feet, a young woman stood, Leona Daniels, a known activist for black rights. She confidently raised her hand and asked, "Senator Grant, you talk about cutting aid, but how will this affect our community, where we've lacked infrastructure and opportunities for years? How can people stand on their own without the necessary resources?" The room grew silent. Her question was sharp, and the crowd waited for his reply. Irritated, Grant looked at Leona and, instead of answering directly, belittled her. "Maybe if your community learned responsibility, they wouldn't rely on handouts," he said smugly. His words stung. Some supporters laughed awkwardly, but many in the room felt uneasy with the insult. Leona remained composed, though anger surged within her. She stood in disbelief at a politician publicly making such a contemptuous remark. The room fell into heavy silence. Leona sat down quietly, but inside she was boiling. She knew this moment had sparked a turning point, and she wouldn't let the insult go unanswered. After the City Hall incident, Leona Daniels couldn't shake her frustration and anger. The humiliation from Senator Thomas Grant's dismissive remark lingered. His smug grin, the crowd's silence, and her own powerlessness replayed in her mind. But it wasn't just his words. It was what they symbolized. Leona had faced prejudice all her life. Her community suffered from systemic issues, poverty, lack of resources, and unequal education and health care. Every new injustice reminded her of the hardships her people endured. She was tired of black people being treated as second-class citizens, and her patience had worn thin. She reflected on the incident, filled with indignation but knowing emotional reactions would be a mistake. She sought justice, not revenge. She needed a way to use this moment for her community's benefit. Should she file a defamation lawsuit or use the moment to highlight larger issues black people faced? Leona turned to her mentors, people who had fought for civil rights for decades. One, an elderly lawyer named Marcus, warned her to think carefully before acting. "You're entitled to justice, Leona, but every move will be scrutinized. Anger is natural, but your actions should come from a desire for change, not revenge." Aisha, a well-known activist, suggested a more radical approach, supporting legal action. She argued this could set a precedent for addressing public insults and racial discrimination, but warned Leona, "If you go legal, prepare for a long fight. They'll try to discredit you. Be sure you're strong enough to handle the pressure." Leona realized her decision could impact her community. She couldn't afford a mistake. She craved immediate justice, but knew this could be a step in the broader fight for rights. Acting out of anger wasn't an option. She had to think of the future and how this could shape society. Her grandmother's words often echoed in her mind. "Justice requires patience and courage. Don't be afraid to be strong, but be wise." Those words became her guiding principle. Leona Daniels was never just an ordinary activist. Her strength lay not only in her passion for justice, but also in her professional expertise. She was a skilled attorney with years of experience working on political campaigns and defending the rights of those the system had overlooked. Her name was already known in certain circles, and her professionalism was highly respected. After the incident with Senator Grant, her profile only grew, attracting the attention of politicians and activists in Washington, D.C. A few months after that unpleasant meeting, Leona received an unexpected offer from a new Senate candidate, James Carver, known for his progressive agenda. He planned to reform the social welfare system, and minority rights were at the heart of his platform. Carver knew he needed a team of professionals to achieve his goals, and Leona was the perfect candidate. When she was offered the chance to join his campaign, she didn't hesitate. This job would give her the opportunity to bring about the changes she had been fighting for. In Washington, Leona quickly became a key player. Her experience and legal training allowed her to coordinate the campaign effectively and strategize on how to advance Carver's proposals. She meticulously crafted each bill, ensuring that all details were addressed, and negotiated with various factions. Her work was intense, but it was exactly what she had wanted, a chance to make real change. As the election campaign progressed, Leona knew it would be a tough battle, especially given Carver's opponents. But she was ready for anything. This wasn't just a fight for a Senate seat, it was a fight for the future of her community. She knew that if her candidate won, it would open new doors for advancing the rights of those who had been voiceless in the political system for years. After months of hard work, the decisive moment arrived. Carver won the election, and his victory was a true triumph, not only for his campaign, but also for those who had been hoping for change. Leona was offered the position of Chief of Staff, making her one of the most influential figures in the team. She became responsible for coordinating all legislative processes, discussing new initiatives, and managing the internal policies of the office. The irony was that just a few months after Carver took office, Senator Thomas Grant, the same man who had publicly insulted Leona, lost his position as the head of the Senate committee. Political scandals and internal strife weakened his standing, and he was now forced to play by new rules. But the most surprising twist was that Leona was now his direct superior. When Grant walked into his first meeting with the new team, he was shocked to see her at the head of the table. For him, it was an unpleasant surprise. The woman he had humiliated in front of a crowd was now in charge of his political activity. Leona, maintaining complete composure, looked at him with the confidence of someone who knew her own power. At that moment, everyone realized. Times had changed. Leona had not only succeeded, she had become a force capable of shaping the futures of not just people in City Hall meetings, but of those who had once tried to silence her voice. The day came when Senator Thomas Grant, still confident in his status, arrived for yet another official Senate committee meeting. He walked into the room, head held high, oblivious to the changes happening around him. His confidence was a part of his image. He always knew he was at the top, that his position and influence were untouchable. This time, Grant was fully absorbed in his thoughts, preparing to discuss a new bill, when his eyes landed on the figure standing at the head of the table, Leona Daniels. Grant's expression froze instantly. He felt his confidence slip away. All he could remember was that day at the City Hall meeting when he arrogantly insulted this woman, as if her opinion didn't matter. He recalled every look, every word laced with sarcasm, and how the audience had laughed at his biting remark. But today, there was no laughter. Leona's gaze was unwavering, and in her eyes, Grant saw something new, a fire of justice and strength. She was no longer the woman he could belittle and easily forget. She stood before him as his new superior. Leona met his gaze calmly, without a trace of emotion on her face, but her eyes spoke volumes. She was now the one in control of the situation. Her composure showed that she had long passed the point where emotions dictated her actions. She was prepared for every moment of this encounter, her spirit forged by years of fighting for justice. Grant shrank inwardly. He understood that his career and political future were now in this woman's hands. Every move, every word he uttered in her presence would be judged. There was no hiding from this reality. His arrogance and former confidence no longer mattered. The room was thick with tension as Leona finally spoke. Her voice was steady and calm, but there was a quiet power beneath it. "Maybe it's time to learn some responsibility." Her words echoed the very insult Grant had once thrown at her. It wasn't just a comment, it was a challenge to a man who had spent years wielding his power to humiliate and ignore the needs of those he was supposed to protect. Grant felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He had to face the truth that everything had changed. Seconds stretched on, and Grant couldn't utter a word. He understood that this wasn't just another meeting. It was a moment that could define his future. Leona, whose name he hadn't even bothered to remember when he insulted her in front of everyone, now stood at the top, holding his political fate in her hands. Leona, showing her resilience and self-assurance, said nothing more. Her gaze spoke for her. She made it clear that she would no longer allow anyone like Grant to act with impunity and treat her community, and her, with such disrespect. Grant, lowering his gaze, realized that times had indeed changed. He was no longer the man who could get away with arrogant displays.